Well, breaking tonight, new reports that Russia could potentially be on the brink of a civil war. Of course, it could also be a disinformation campaign. So right now, the Wagner Group accuses, these are the mercenaries that have been fighting on the lines against Ukraine, particularly in Bakhmut. Well, the Wagner Group is accusing Russia and Russia's military of killing 2,000 of its own men. Meanwhile, Russia firing back, launching an investigation of the group's chief, Yevgeny Prigozhin, for inciting a, quote, armed mutiny. That's right, you heard me, an armed mutiny. Well, the breaking news follows the United Nations confirming yesterday that Russian armed forces and related groups used 91 children as human shields. And according to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense, children are being placed on Russian trucks to protect the vehicles while moving. When I was in Ukraine, I heard about the Russians doing this, using civilians in this manner as well. Well, the UN report reviewed by Reuters news agency also confirmed that Russian armed forces killed 136 children in Ukraine in 2022, and it separately lists that those forces maimed 518 children and launched 480 attacks on schools and hospitals. These numbers have been verified by the UN, despite Russia, of course, denying ever targeting civilians or civilian structures. Well, yesterday, the Russian armed forces was officially added to the UN's global offenders list. Now, the UN also reports that attacks by Ukrainian forces have resulted in the death of 80 children, maimed 175, and launched 212 attacks on schools and hospitals. But Ukraine is not included on that list. Now, Ukraine is still in the early stages of its counteroffensive, with both sides suffering heavy losses. Wednesday, in an interview with the BBC, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that progress has been, quote, slower than desired, but he nonetheless said he remains determined. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said Ukrainian forces have, quote, still have a lot of combat capability and combat power, of course, thanks in a large part to the U.S. and our Western allies and our equipment and machinery and weapons. Retired Brigadier General and Combat C-17 Commander for the U.S. Air Force and former U.S. Deputy Military Rep to NATO, as well as Newsmax contributor. That's a long title. Blaine Holt joins me. It's I know you as Blaino, but you know, perfect. General. I'll call you General for the purposes here. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming on. I want to start with these reports about the Wagner Group, Prigozhin, and Russia, saying that investigating this for inciting a an armed mutiny. What's your read on that? This is incredibly intriguing. Prigozhin has been talking some smack over the last couple of weeks, and now it's really ratcheted up. Is this disinformation, or are things starting to unravel?
Yeah, we've got to keep a very open mind to the two possibilities. I'm glad you kind of framed it that way. You know, they have really tolerated insubordination out of him for quite some time. And I've always been very curious as to why they would do that. That's not very Russian of them. Normally, if you step out of line, there's only one answer for you, and it comes at the end of a bullet. But not so with Prigozhin. And today he really jumped the shark. A lot of threats against Shoigu's life, threats against the Russian army. And we see a Kremlin that's actually taking physical actions that match these words, activating the Fortress Plan, which is a plan in the Kremlin area for a coup, putting the Southern District on high military alert, activating the National Guard, rolling up the headquarters for Wagner in St. Petersburg. Now, those things all look consistent, but there's a lot here that might not be consistent. First off, Prigozhin's supposed to be in Belgorod. If he's doing that, why is Moscow on high alert? Are we worried about Russian insiders in the military actually being a threat? And the other part is, would this just be a very convenient distraction in advance of some greater attack that the Russian army is going to put on here? We should be very much head on a swivel and open to both possibilities, because I'm, for one, not convinced that things are what they look like to us.
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that second part, that's what I was thinking when I heard this. Because Russia, we've seen the disinformation campaign on both sides, but Russia particularly. So maybe this is some kind of distraction, campaign and effort to try to throw the Ukrainians off. I'm not sure that would work. but we shall see. Real quick about this UN list that I talked about in the intro. You and I both know there will always be casualties of war, the innocent men, women, and children who are killed. But the use of children as human shields is really beyond the pale. I've covered other wars and conflicts when this was done. Hamas in Gaza during the war with Israel in 2014 comes to mind, operating out of hospitals and UN facilities there. And I was certainly told by people who were used as human shields in Ukraine about this happening. But that said, you know, Ukraine, I mentioned the casualties and you know, that Ukraine was also responsible for the death of children. So why is Ukraine not on the list as well, along with Russia?
Yeah, you know, I think all of it in time, in the fullness of time, needs to be investigated. NATO in the West, and that's where The Hague sits right now, is certainly sympathetic to the Ukrainian plight and supportive of that. And what we hope and what we would urge is that the Ukrainians would take the responsible steps and investigate anything that doesn't look right in their own and hold themselves up to account where necessary. At the same time, you know, the Russians seem puzzled as to why there's such an outpouring for the Ukrainian people. It's, well, they were actually invaded and you're torturing, raping, killing, and abducting them. And so let's get the politics off to the side. We can all have our hearts open to the plight of innocent people who don't deserve this at all.
Yeah, great point. Keeping the eye on the ball there. Brigadier General Blaine Holt, as always, great to see you. Thanks for your insight.
Great to see you.
Have a great weekend.
Take care, John.
Likewise.